When the offer first arrived, I thought it was just another temporary contract. The kind of odd fieldwork that appears in classifieds when someone with a geology degree and a stubborn willingness to crawl into caves hasn't yet found a proper university post. They called it a hydrographic survey assignment. That was the sterile phrase stamped across the paperwork. In truth, I was being hired to map the course of an underground river deep in the limestone mountains. The pay was high, suspiciously high, and that should have been my first warning. The letterhead came from a research collective I hadn't heard of, supposedly based in Vienna, though the return address was a post office box in a border town I couldn't find on a modern map. None of that mattered when the bank statement came through. Money has a way of silencing good sense. The journey took 3 days. A train ride along rails that felt abandoned, a bus that stank of diesel and mildew, and finally a trek by foot along a crumbling stone path that snaked into the mountains. The higher I climbed, the thinner the air grew, sharp with frost even in early spring. By the time I reached the camp, I felt as though I'd been swallowed by rock and silence. The base was nothing more than a collection of weather-stained canvas tents pitched outside a wide limestone mouth. The entrance gaped like the jaw of something dead, stalactites hanging like broken teeth. From within came the sound of water, steady, low, endless. 3 people met me. The first was a tall, wiry man with a lantern in one hand and a notebook clutched in the other. He introduced himself as Becker, the team leader. His handshake was limp, his eyes always flicking over my shoulder as though expecting someone else to appear behind me. The second was Lena, a young woman with dark hair braided tightly down her back. She smiled when she saw me, though the smile didn't reach her eyes. There was something guarded there, like she was weighing whether I could be trusted. The third man barely spoke. His name was Carl, stocky with a beard that looked like it had been gnawed at rather than trimmed. He grunted when Becker introduced us, then turned back to adjusting the straps on a coil of rope. The camp smelled of wet canvas, kerosene, and the faint tang of mold. I dropped my pack, eager to rest, but Becker didn't give me the chance. "You should see it tonight," he said. His voice carried a reverence that made the hairs on my arms rise. "It's better you understand what you'll be working with before dawn." I thought he meant the river, but as we lit the lanterns and began the descent into the cavern, I realized he meant the darkness itself. The limestone swallowed sound. Every drip of water was magnified into a hollow echo, each footstep booming as though we walked on drums. My clothes clung damp against my skin, and the deeper we went, the colder the air grew, carrying a mineral stench of iron and rot. The walls glistened with moss and pale fungi that quivered when our lanterns passed. Shadows swayed unnaturally, bending in directions the light did not. I tried not to watch them. The first chamber opened wide, a cathedral carved by erosion, its ceiling lost in blackness. A single wooden platform had been built at the edge of the river, where it surged from the stone like an artery. The water was impossibly dark, a mirror swallowing our reflections. "This is where you'll begin," Becker said, setting his lantern down on the platform. His voice was soft, almost drowned by the current. "We've charted what we can, but the system extends deeper. Your task is to follow, to measure, to record. The river moves in ways it shouldn't. It carves tunnels that don't obey the mountain's shape." I crouched by the edge, dipping a gloved hand near the surface. The water was cold enough to bite, carrying the smell of earth that had never seen sunlight. As I pulled back, I thought I saw a ripple move against the current, as though something below had stirred. When I asked Becker how long they'd been here, he said, "Long enough." Lena added quickly, "Not long at all." Carl said nothing. Their voices echoed differently, as though the cavern didn't want their answers. We camped that night in the chamber, bedrolls spread across damp stone. My dreams were restless, filled with the endless drip of water, the sensation of being carried along in a current I couldn't resist. At one point, I woke to see Lena sitting upright, staring at the river, lips moving silently as though speaking to it. The descent had only just begun, but already I felt the weight of the mountain closing in around me. The air pressed heavy, wet against my lungs. Every breath smelled of limestone and decay. I told myself it was only the strangeness of a new job, the discomfort of damp stone beneath my back. But even then, as I lay awake listening to the endless murmur of the current, I felt it, a sense that something below the surface was listening too. I expected Becker to hand me a map, Or maybe a set of technical instructions, something about the instruments, or the routine of measuring flow rates and sketching topography. Instead, on the first night, after the lanterns had been lit and the cavern base camp sealed in its cocoon of dim light, he passed me a laminated sheet. The lamination was cracked, peeling at the edges, as though it had been handled 1,000 times before. The paper beneath had yellowed, water-stained, warped like old skin. The words, typed in plain block letters, were smudged in places, but they were still readable. There were only 4 rules. Never count the shadows in the water. Never drink directly from the river. Always return by the 3rd toll of the warning bell. Never let the lantern flame touch black water. I laughed when I read them. The sound bounced around the cavern and came back to me flat, humorless, like the walls themselves had swallowed it. "Is this a joke?" I asked, but no one joined in. Becker's eyes didn't move from me. He had the look of a man waiting for a confession. Lena's mouth was pressed tight, as though she was holding back words she wanted to say but knew she shouldn't. Carl busied himself with his pack, though his fingers trembled slightly on the straps. "No jokes," Becker said at last. His voice was lower than before, carrying weight, ritual. He took the sheet back from me as though I'd mishandled something sacred and began to read the rules aloud. He didn't recite them quickly. Each one came in a hush, his voice heavy as the dripping water in the dark. "Never count the shadows in the water," he said. And I swear I felt the river shift in response, a faint tremor in the stone beneath me. "Never drink directly from the river." My throat went dry. The current behind us hummed louder, though I couldn't be sure if it was imagination or echo. "Always return by the 3rd toll of the warning bell." The lantern flames flickered, shadows lengthening across the walls as if listening. "Never let the lantern flame touch black water." Becker stopped. No one breathed. The last words lingered, dissolving into the murmur of the current. When he finished, Lena crossed herself, not in any way I recognized from church, but a strange looping gesture, fingers brushing shoulder, temple, lips, then chest. Carl shut his eyes briefly, murmuring something under his breath. Becker folded the sheet and placed it in a tin box by the lanterns as though storing a relic. I wanted to speak, to break the suffocating silence, but the river answered before I could. Its voice was not words, not exactly, but a deep pulse beneath the dripping stone, a rhythm that felt deliberate. "Why the theatrics?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "It's water. A current. Nothing more." Lena looked at me then, really looked, her gaze sharp as a blade in the dim glow. "Don't mock what you don't understand," she whispered. "People died," Carl said suddenly, voice raw, breaking his usual silence. He didn't elaborate. Becker finally sighed, rubbing his temples as though he regretted something. "You'll see soon enough," he muttered. "The rules aren't to frighten you. They're to keep you alive. Treat them like scripture. If you cannot, then you shouldn't have come." I wanted to argue, but something in his tone, so absolute, so resigned, stopped me. Later, lying on my bedroll with the lantern burning low beside me, I stared at the cavern ceiling. Shadows shifted there, flickering in restless arcs like fish swimming just out of reach of the flame. The river whispered nearby, a constant, endless murmur. I closed my eyes, trying to ignore it, but the rules kept repeating themselves in my head, slow and deliberate, as if someone else was reciting them in the dark. Never count the shadows in the water. Never drink directly from the river. Always return by the 3rd toll of the warning bell. Never let the lantern flame touch black water. I told myself they were just superstitions, old miners maybe, inventing folklore to give shape to their fear of the underground. But the more I repeated them silently, the less they felt like rules. They felt like prayers, and deep below the river kept humming, like a living thing waiting to be obeyed. The next morning began with the taste of damp stone already clinging to the back of my throat. Becker roused us early, though it was impossible to tell the difference between dawn and midnight down here. Time didn't move in the caverns. It sagged, it stretched, it pooled the way water did. I was assigned to join Carl and Lena for my first mapping run. Becker gave me a small canvas pouch containing parchment, pencils sealed in wax, and a compass whose needle spun too freely for my liking. "The currents make it strange," he said, as though that explained anything. We set out along a narrow ledge where the river pressed close against the cavern wall. Our lanterns swayed in the damp air, casting thin, shivering light on slick rock. I kept glancing down, unable to stop myself from peering into the current. The water was wrong. That was the first thing I noticed. Rivers on the surface chatter, they break, they tumble. This one slid by in silence, smooth as glass, yet too fast for comfort. It didn't foam. It didn't break around rocks. It just moved endlessly like something alive pretending to be water. Lena walked ahead, her lantern fixed steady in her hand. Her steps were careful, almost ritualistic. Carl brought up the rear, shoulders hunched, eyes darting to every ripple. I tried to follow their example, but curiosity kept tugging me toward the black current at my side. At first, I thought the shadows beneath the surface were just tricks of the lantern glow. Rock formations, maybe, or fish darting away from the light. But they didn't behave like shadows should. Some were too sharp, holding their form even as the current shifted. Others lagged behind, drifting slower than the water carrying them. Most unsettling of all, they didn't align with us. If I held my hand above the river, its reflection bent strangely, lengthening, splitting, as if the water couldn't decide how many fingers I had. I remembered the first rule then. Never count the shadows in the water. It sounded absurd the night before, but now, I found myself clenching my teeth, forcing myself not to test it. The urge was strange, primal, like staring into a fire and wanting to reach out and touch the flames. We pressed deeper. The cavern walls closed in, forcing a single file along a dripping channel where the roof dipped low enough that Lena's lantern almost brushed it. The air smelled of rust and moss. Water condensed on my skin, cold and clammy, seeping through my clothes until every step felt heavy. Carl muttered directions under his breath, sketching quick notes on his parchment. He barely looked at the river, though every so often I caught his eyes flick toward it, wide and fearful before snapping back to the wall. At one bend, the tunnel widened into a broad chamber where the river fanned out into a pool. The ceiling disappeared into blackness above, and our lantern seemed smaller here, weaker, swallowed by the immensity of shadow. The surface of the water was too still. Even with the current feeding into it, the pool did not ripple. Shapes drifted beneath the surface, long, tall, vaguely human. Lena stopped at the bank, whispering something I couldn't hear. She lowered her lantern carefully, careful to keep the flame away from the water. "Don't stare," Carl hissed, his voice tight, "and don't count." I turned away, but not before the shapes beneath the surface shifted, aligning like a crowd waiting to be acknowledged. We skirted the pool quickly. The tunnel narrowed again, the sound of dripping water amplifying until it felt like 1,000 slow clocks ticking out of sync. I breathed through my mouth, the air metallic and damp, tasting of iron. Halfway back, I froze. There were footsteps behind us, not Lena's, not Carl's. Something heavier, dragging slightly, like boots soaked through. I turned sharply, lantern raised. The tunnel stretched empty, the beam catching only slick walls and our own faint shadows. Carl looked at me sharply, his face pale. "You heard it too?" I whispered. He nodded once quickly, then shook his head like a man trying to deny himself. "Keep walking." We did, faster this time, the sound of our boots crunching against gravel echoing too loudly. But every so often beneath that, I heard it again. Steps in the water, keeping pace with us. When we reached the chamber where we'd started, Becker was waiting by the fire pit. He didn't ask what we'd seen, only looked at Carl's sketches, then at me. "You kept the rules?" he asked. "Yes," I said, more defensive than I meant. "Good," he muttered, though the way his eyes searched my face made me wonder if he believed me. That night, lying in my bedroll, I couldn't sleep. The river murmured ceaselessly through the cavern, and beneath it, just at the edge of hearing, came the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps, keeping time with my breath. The next day, Becker announced another mapping run, this time deeper upriver. My legs ached from the last trek, but none of us complained. Complaining wasn't worth the looks the others would give. Thin, hollow stares that said you weren't strong enough for what was coming. We had a new addition that morning. A man named Harris freshly arrived with the last supply run. He was younger than the rest of us, maybe mid-20s, with a bright red helmet and the kind of grin that didn't belong underground. He whistled as he checked his rope and lantern, sound bouncing unnaturally in the cavern air. When Becker recited the rules again, he always did before a survey, Harris laughed out loud. "You all really buy this nonsense? Don't count the shadows? Don't drink the magic water? Christ, it's like campfire ghost stories." No one else laughed. I caught Lena looking at the ground, her face pale, lips pressed tight. Carl stared into the lantern flame, knuckles white where he gripped the handle. "Take it seriously," Becker said flatly. But Harris only smirked. "Sure, no counting shadows." Got it, the hike began tense. We moved single file along narrow ledges, the river rushing just beside our boots. The cavern ceiling dipped so low in places that my helmet scraped. Harris kept talking, filling the silence with jokes, humming tunes that echoed strangely, warped by the stone until it sounded like someone else was humming with him. We reached a long corridor where the river narrowed to a dark ribbon, shadows twisting beneath its skin. Our lantern swayed over the water, making the reflections bend and split. That's when Harris leaned over. "Look at this," he chuckled, crouching by the edge. "They look like people. Hell, I can see legs. You really mean to tell me none of you ever counted them?" "Don't!" Lena snapped, sharper than I'd ever heard her. But Harris only grinned wider. "What's the worst that could happen?" He pointed at the water, following a shadow drifting too slow for the current. "One," he said loudly. The sound rang in the cavern like a bell. The shadows stirred. 2. The river began to rise. Not in waves, not in splashes, but in a single vertical sheet, as if gravity itself had been reversed. Water clung to the air like glass. By the time Harris said 3, it was too late. The river surged upward, a black column that wrapped around him like a fist. His laughter turned to a scream, cut short as he was yanked into the current. 1 second he was crouching there, red helmet catching lantern light. The next he was gone, swallowed whole. The water slammed back into place with a sound like a door slamming shut. The river smoothed instantly, too instantly, as though nothing had happened. Only his helmet remained, bobbing once before the current carried it away. No one moved. The silence pressed in, heavier than the stone above us. Even the river seemed quieter, holding its breath. I realized I was shaking. My breath came in short bursts, echoing off the walls like someone sobbing far away. I turned to Becker, to Lena, to Carl, waiting for someone to say something to acknowledge what we had just seen. But Becker only raised his lantern and said, "Keep moving." That was it. No shock, no outrage, just acceptance, as if Harris had never existed. We walked in silence the rest of the way. Every drip of water was amplified, every scuff of boots grating in my ears. My nose caught the faintest tang of iron, though no one bled. When we returned to camp, Harris's bedroll was gone. His gear, his pack, even his name on Becker's logbook gone, as though he'd never come down here at all. But I remembered his voice. I remembered his laugh. And that night, as I lay awake with the river murmuring in the dark, I swore I heard it again, faint and broken, bubbling up from the current. After Harris, the silence in camp thickened. No one spoke of him, not even in whispers. His absence hung in the air heavier than smoke, yet it was treated like a thing forbidden to acknowledge. Becker never mentioned his name again. His bedroll was gone, his pack gone, his helmet carried off down the river. But I remembered. And the river remembered too. At first it was subtle. Lying awake in my bedroll, I would hear the water rushing in its channel beyond the firelight. It was constant, an endless shushing murmur that never ceased. But sometimes, if I half closed my eyes and let myself drift, the sound would split into layers. One steady, one softer, more delicate. Like syllables woven into the current. The first night, I thought it was only my name being formed in the water. A trick of exhaustion, the brain shaping patterns where none existed. But then the voices multiplied. Not full words at first, only fragments. Come, closer, below. During the day, the voices faded into the background. But at the riverbank, when we sketched and measured, I caught myself leaning closer to the water, as though straining to catch a half-heard confession. I wasn't the only one. Carl moved differently now, twitching whenever the current hissed too loudly. His skin was pale, clammy with more than damp air. He scratched absent-mindedly at his arms until one afternoon, when I noticed scars just beneath the fabric of his sleeve. I asked him about them when Becker sent us to chart a narrow side channel. The lantern light barely reached the water, making it seem bottomless, a black void flowing past our boots. "Those marks," I said quietly, pointing at his arm where the cloth had slipped. He glanced down, then sighed. Slowly, deliberately, he rolled his sleeve up to the elbow. What I saw didn't look like ordinary scars. They weren't jagged like cuts or ragged like burns. They were patterned, perfect arcs of indents evenly spaced, circling his forearm in neat rings. Too symmetrical, too clean. "They remember," he muttered, eyes flicking to the current. His lips trembled, voice breaking into a whisper. "Once you start to count, they never forget. You belong to them after that." Before I could ask more, he yanked his sleeve down and turned away, lantern swinging sharply with the motion. That night, the whispers grew louder. They weren't faint suggestions anymore, but distinct voices threading together. One was Harris, still bubbling, distorted as though he spoke through a mouthful of water. Another was a woman's voice, soft and low. I didn't recognize it then, but later I would. When I covered my ears, the sound didn't stop. It vibrated in my chest, rattling the bones of my skull. The water wasn't speaking into the cavern, it was speaking into me. I stopped sleeping. I would lie on my back, staring into the dark above, the whispers counting in slow, steady rhythm beneath the rushing current. They never reached the number 3. They always stopped at 2, then began again. 1, 2, 1, 2. As if daring me to finish. The strangest thing was how ordinary everyone else acted. Becker sharpened his pencils by the fire, recording measurements. Lena braided her hair in silence. The others cleaned their lantern glass with methodical care. No one admitted they heard it, yet their eyes betrayed them. Darting to the river, pupils wide, fingers trembling when the whispers rose too loud. I wanted to ask Lena if she heard Harris too, but something in her face warned me not to. She looked thinner than before, shadows deep beneath her eyes, lips pale as though all warmth had drained from her. Once, when she thought no one was watching, I saw her mouth forming silent words along with the river like prayer. By the 5th night, I wasn't sure if the whispers were in the water or in my blood. I woke with my throat dry, my tongue thick with thirst. The river's surface gleamed faintly in the distance, reflecting lantern light from camp. My body moved before I could think, dragging me toward it. When I crouched at the bank, the current seemed to slow. The whispers sharpened, turning clear. "Drink," they murmured. "Join." My hand reached down, shaking. A snap of fingers behind me jolted me awake. Becker stood there, lantern raised, eyes dark and furious. "Not from the river," he growled. "Never from the river." He held my gaze until I pulled back, hands trembling, breath coming too fast. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away, flame bobbing until it vanished into the dark. The water rippled where my hand had hovered, as though something beneath had brushed against it. And in that ripple, for a moment I saw Harris's face staring back at me, eyes open wide, mouth still moving as though trying to speak, though only the river's whispers came out. The 6th survey felt heavier than the others, though Becker said nothing about it. We set out in pairs, me, Lena, and Carl, our lanterns freshly trimmed and fueled. The air clung colder the deeper we went, the stone walls sweating with condensation, each breath fogged in the dim light, as though we were already underwater. The tunnel narrowed to a ledge beside a wide black pool, one Becker had warned us about. It was deeper than the others, a basin where the current slowed to a crawl, then vanished beneath a rock shelf. The surface was too still, mirror flat, reflecting our lanterns in perfect halos. "Stay close," Carl muttered, voice tense. His eyes flicked constantly to the pool, refusing to linger too long. I held my lantern higher. The flame sputtered against the draft rising from the black water, shadows swaying across the cavern walls. For a moment I thought I saw my own reflection look up at me, not quite in time with my movement. Its lips parted slightly as though whispering. I swallowed hard and kept walking. That was when the draft grew stronger. A low sigh of air, damp and cold, washed over us. My lantern flickered once, twice, then went dark. The darkness was total. I froze, chest locked tight, heart hammering against my ribs. I couldn't even see my hands in front of me. My ears strained, and I swore I heard claws scratching lightly against stone, close, too close. "Light it." Lena's voice cracked through the black. Her lantern flame wavered somewhere ahead, weak against the cavern's hunger. I fumbled for my matches, hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped them. Behind me, something shifted. Whetstone creaked as though something heavy pressed against it. The air tasted of iron, sharp and metallic. I struck once, sparks only. My breath hitched. The scrape came again, this time followed by a low, guttural noise like water boiling in a sealed kettle. Second strike. Flame caught. Weak, but real. I lifted the match to the wick, hands trembling, praying it would hold. The flame sputtered, caught, then bloomed. Light spilled over the stone. I froze again, right where I'd been standing. The rock was slick with moisture. 3 long grooves gouged into the limestone as though claws had raked across it. The marks were fresh. The water hadn't touched that ledge, not naturally, but it gleamed wet all the same. The pool rippled, concentric circles spreading outward, though nothing had disturbed it. And beneath the surface, shadows shifted. Too many, crowding one another like bodies pressing toward the glassy surface. Lena grabbed my arm, pulling me back toward the path. "Keep it lit," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Never let it go out. Never here." I nodded, clutching the lantern so tight the metal bit into my palm. We didn't speak again until the black pool was behind us, swallowed by the curve of the tunnel. But even then, the air seemed to follow. Every gust of damp draft brushed against my neck like a cold breath. And when we returned to camp, I could still hear the scrape of claws in my skull, echoing with every drip of water. That night I dreamed I was holding the lantern again, its flame guttering in the dark. But this time, when it went out, I didn't strike a match. I only stood there waiting, listening, until the shadows rose and whispered in perfect unison, "Yours." I woke with my nails digging into my palms hard enough to leave crescent marks, the lantern flame beside my bedroll sputtering as if it, too, had dreamed. Lena had been one of the few who spoke to me without clipped answers or that glazed, tired stare everyone else carried. She had a laugh, soft but real, and once even joked about the smell of Becker's pipe tobacco. Said it was the only thing down here that reminded her of the surface. That laugh carried me through more nights than I realized, which is why the morning she was gone felt impossible. Her bedroll lay flattened, the blanket folded neatly on top as though she had risen calmly and made her bed. But her boots were missing, her rucksack too, and the soil near the riverbank, the thin strip of pebbles that lined the underground shore, was darkened with damp prints leading directly into the water. "They were barefoot. Where is she?" I asked, though my throat felt raw, scraped by sleep. I looked at Carl, at Becker, at the others who moved about camp like nothing was amiss. Becker looked up from adjusting his lantern, brows pinched as though I'd interrupted something important. "Who?" "Lena," I said louder. "She's gone. Look, her prints lead right into the river." Carl glanced where I pointed, then back at Becker, and they shared a look I didn't like. A quick flash of agreement, like rehearsed lines. "There is no Lena," Becker said flatly. His voice was calm, deliberate. "You're tired. The caves bend thoughts if you're not careful." My stomach dropped. Don't do that." "Don't lie to me." But they kept moving, packing coils of rope, checking their instruments, as if Lena had never existed. I staggered toward the river's edge. The footprints were still there, pressed into damp gravel, toes sharp where she'd stepped. The water lapped quietly, too gently for this place, and wedged between 2 rocks near the edge was a strip of red fabric. I reached down, tugged it free. It was her scarf. I knew it instantly. She'd worn it on colder nights, claiming it reminded her of her grandmother's kitchen curtains. The edges dripped with black water, heavier than it should have been, though I knew for a fact Lena had never let it touch the current. I held it up, shaking. This is hers, but when I turned back, the camp was silent. No one met my eyes. Carl muttered something about echoes under his breath, and Becker barked at him to keep quiet. I clenched the scarf in my fist until the damp bled through, soaking into my skin. That night I lay awake, listening. The cave dripped steadily, water striking stone in rhythms too precise to be natural. Every so often, a sound threaded through. Footsteps, slow, unshod, walking along the gravel shore. I squeezed my eyes shut, clutching the scarf like a tether, and told myself I wouldn't look. But curiosity has teeth. Near dawn, I cracked one eyelid. By the faint lantern glow, I saw her silhouette. Lena stood at the edge of the camp, her face hidden in shadow, her arms hanging unnaturally limp. Water dripped steadily from her fingertips, pattering on the stone. She turned slowly toward me, and though I couldn't see her features, I knew she was smiling. I sat up, choking on her name. The scarf slipped from my grip. She raised a hand, beckoning, then turned and walked toward the river without a sound. I stumbled forward, nearly shouting, but Becker's hand clamped on my shoulder like iron. "Don't," he hissed. His breath stank of damp tobacco. "That's not her. It never was, but I knew what I'd seen. the wet footprints that weren't there when I woke. The scarf still damp against my skin. The voice I swore whispered to me when the lanterns dimmed. Even now as I write this, I can smell the faintest trace of her perfume, a cheap floral spray she wore in defiance of the rot around us. No one else seems to notice. The others want me to forget, to pretend Lena was never here. But the river remembers, and so do I. It was Becker's fault I found the chest. He'd been drinking again, an old metal flask that smelled like ethanol and mold. And in his stupor, he stumbled against the storage alcove carved into the cavern wall. A panel of wood shifted when he hit it, and before anyone could stop me, I pried it loose. Behind the boards was a chest, iron-bound and swollen with rot. Its hinges groaned when I dragged it out, flakes of rust falling onto the stone. The others muttered uneasily, refusing to meet my eyes. Becker cursed under his breath, then slumped back onto his cot, feigning sleep. I waited until the camp had gone quiet before opening it. The stench that spilled out was thick. Mildew, wet leather, a tang like iron left too long in the rain. I gagged but forced myself to look. Inside were books, journals, at least a dozen swollen with damp, their pages buckled and stained. Some were bound in cracked leather, others in canvas. A few were so fragile that the paper disintegrated at my touch. I lifted one carefully, brushing mold from its cover. The ink had bled in places, but the handwriting was still legible. First night, rules recited. Shadows in the water don't match the flame. Hendricks counted. He's gone. The entry stopped abruptly, leaving only a line where the pen had torn the paper. Another journal spoke of a warning bell, of how the water rose when its tolls were ignored. We thought we had more time. Flood took him between the second and third strike. His scream carried under the current. The river does not forgive hesitation. I read until my lantern burned low, turning pages with trembling hands. Each journal carried the same rhythm. Initial hope, recitation of rules, then the steady attrition of their numbers. A shadow counted, a sip of water swallowed in thirst, a lantern flame too close to the black pools. Every time the punishment was swift and unique. But what unsettled me most wasn't the punishments. It was how the river adapted. In one book dated decades earlier, the writer described seeing shapes in the water only when the lantern light struck just right. In later journals written years apart, the shadows had become constant, present even without light. One passage chilled me enough that I had to set the book down, hand shaking. It learns the names. At first only whispers, then voices. It called to me in my mother's tongue, though no one else here speaks it. When I refused to answer, it grew silent. But that night, my reflection moved without me. I cannot trust the water nor myself. I closed the journal quickly, my skin prickling. The next volume I opened was barely half finished. The handwriting was frantic, ink blotched by water stains. Lena walked into the river. She smiled at me as she vanished beneath. They say she was never here, but I know what I saw. Her scarf remains, and I keep it near. The river does not just take, it erases. My heart stopped. The handwriting wasn't mine, but it could have been. The words matched my experience perfectly, down to the scarf. I stared at the page until my vision blurred. Whoever wrote it had lived this before me. Maybe hundreds had. Maybe the river had swallowed whole generations of surveyors, leaving only these damp confessions behind. Every journal ended the same way, mid-sentence, ink trailing into nothing as though the hand holding the pen had been pulled away suddenly. I replaced them carefully, but the smell of mold clung to me, burrowing into my skin. Even when I lay down, scarf clutched tight, I could taste the rot of those words at the back of my throat. That night, the dripping of the cavern seemed louder, as if the stone itself remembered every vanished voice. And in my dreams, I saw pages floating in black water, words dissolving, the ink bleeding until it formed a face. Lena's face. She mouthed something soundless over and over as the pages tore apart in the current. When I jolted awake, I knew the journals hadn't been warnings, they were eulogies, written in advance. The river's breath changes. Before the bell tolls, you learn to hear it if you spend enough time down. There, the difference between the lazy lap of current against stone and the heavy inhale that means the caverns are about to shift. That night I was too deep in the tunnels to notice. Too intent on my maps, on finishing just one more sketch before heading back. We'd been in a section we called the rib cage, narrow corridors of limestone that bent and curved like a skeleton's chest. Water pooled along the path, barely knee-deep in most places. My lantern trembled in my hand as I traced ridges, making careful notes. The others had already left, their echoes long gone. I told myself I'd catch up. That's when the bell tolled. The first strike was faint, carried down the rock like a ripple. I froze, pen lifted halfway across the page. 1 toll meant prepare, 2 meant return. 3 was the last warning. I should have turned back immediately, but I stared at my unfinished map. At the blank lines where the ribcage narrowed into darkness and something in me resisted. 1 more sketch. Just 1 more. The second toll boomed, heavier this time, vibrating through the stone beneath my boots. Water droplets trembled from the ceiling, breaking into ripples across the pool. I began to pack my things. The third toll hit before I was finished. It wasn't a sound so much as a force. The entire cavern seemed to shudder with it, dust falling in faint curtains. My lantern flame shivered violently, nearly going out. Then I heard the river move. It didn't rise gradually the way a normal flood would. It surged all at once, as though some vast sluice gate had opened unseen upstream. The water that had been knee-high rose to my chest in seconds, dark and freezing, knocking the lantern from my hand. The light sputtered out as it struck the surface. The darkness was immediate. I clawed at the walls, hands slipping on moss and slick stone. My pack dragged me down, maps dissolving against my chest as water seeped through. I tried to rip it free, but the straps tangled against me. The current wasn't a current anymore, it was a body. It pulled, wrapped, dragged me down into its lungs. I opened my mouth to scream and the river entered me. Cold and metallic. It filled my throat, my nose, forcing its way into every cavity. I kicked upward, but the water pressed me back, stronger than gravity, stronger than the earth itself. And then, beneath the roar, I heard voices. Not echoes. Not tricks of rushing water. Voices layered, distant, whispering in drowned tones. Some cried for help. Some laughed. One of them was Lena. "Come down," she whispered, her voice liquid. "It's easier here." My chest convulsed, lungs burning. The water had weight now, pressing from every side. And I realized the rib cage had become real. I was inside it. Ribs closing, lungs filling, the earth itself trying to drown me. Desperate, I clawed upward again, fingers finding a jagged ridge in the stone. I held on with everything I had. My nails tore. My arms shook. The river tried to peel me away like skin from bone. The voices grew louder, a chorus now. Some spoke in languages I didn't know, syllables breaking apart like bubbles. Others used my name again and again, urging me to let go, and I almost did. My grip slipped, body ready to give. But then my hand brushed something hard wedged in the stone. Lena's scarf pin, rusted but still shaped like a silver feather. I don't know how it ended up there. Maybe she left it. Maybe the river placed it. But it gave me something to hold on to besides rock, something that wasn't water. With a final surge of strength, I dragged myself up, breaking the surface. Air never felt so heavy. I coughed, retched, staggered toward higher ground as the flood slammed against me. My lantern bobbed somewhere below, swallowed. My maps were ruined, ink bleeding across paper like veins. I pulled myself onto a narrow ledge as the ribcage filled completely, water smashing against stone with deafening force. The voices didn't stop. They echoed from beneath, faint but constant, like drowned bells ringing far away. By the time I stumbled back to camp, soaked and shaking, the others were waiting. Their faces were unreadable, lanterns casting them in sickly halos. No one asked why I'd returned late. No one offered a blanket. They only looked at me with that same distant recognition, as if I'd already joined the drowned and this body was only a delay. That night, I lay awake listening to the river breathe. Each exhale sounded like a laugh, and I knew the third toll hadn't just been a warning, it had been an invitation. It started the next morning. I was still shaking from the flood, skin raw from stone scrapes, lungs burning from swallowed water. The others pretended not to notice, though I caught them glancing at me as they set up their equipment. Their eyes lingered on my lips as if waiting for something to slip out. That's when I heard it, a whisper, faint but distinct, rising above the steady murmur of the underground current. At first I thought it was someone behind me, but when I turned, the surveyors were too far away, bent over their charts. The sound came again, clearer this time. My name, not shouted. Not called, whispered, like breath against glass. The river said my name. I told myself it was exhaustion, leftover echoes from the flood, the way water carries sound in strange ways. But then it spoke again, and the voice wasn't mine. It was Lena's. I froze, pulse hammering in my ears. "Come back," she said, her words sliding through the current, warped but undeniable. "We're waiting." I staggered back from the bank, boots slipping on wet stone. One of the senior surveyors, Havel, looked up sharply. He saw something in my face, fear, maybe recognition. He shook his head slowly, almost like a warning, and went back to his work without a word. No one asked. That night, the voices didn't stop. As we sat around the dim lanterns of base camp, the river hummed just beyond the walls. Its whispers threaded through our conversations, weaving Lena's tone with others I recognized, the cocky surveyor who had counted the shadows. A child's voice I'd never heard before, and sometimes, disturbingly, my own voice, echoing sentences I hadn't spoken yet, words I hadn't formed. I excused myself, retreating to a quieter chamber. I bent over the water with my lantern raised, the flame trembling in its glass. My reflection trembled too. It wasn't exact. The face in the black water was mine, yes, but its lips were moving when mine were still. The ripples didn't distort it. The eyes were darker, wider, too focused, and when the lips shaped sound, it wasn't echo, it was speech. "You stayed past the toll," it said, voice liquid and distorted. "Now you belong." I dropped the lantern. The glass cracked, but the flame held. For a split second, the light flared across the water, and I saw not one reflection, but many. Dozens of faces crowded behind mine, some blurred, some sharp, eyes too numerous to count. They all whispered my name. I stumbled back, tripping over the stone, gasping as the lantern flickered dangerously. I relit it with trembling hands, refusing to let the flame touch the water. When the glow steadied, the reflections were gone. The next day, the others avoided me outright. No greetings, no questions, no offers of help. I noticed how their lanterns guttered whenever I approached, the flames shrinking low as though air itself thinned around me. Some flinched when I spoke, as if my words carried more than sound. At meals, silence clung heavier than the damp. The only noise was the river whispering through the tunnels, shaping syllables from every drop. Sometimes when I tried to sleep, it whispered things I had never told anyone. Memories I had buried, the name of the woman I left behind in the city, the lie I told to get this job, each secret spoken with perfect accuracy, as though the water had rifled through my head like a chest of belongings. And worse still, it didn't always whisper in my voice. Sometimes it used hers, sometimes Lena's, sometimes voices I thought were gone forever. On the fifth night, I sat awake staring into the lantern flame. My eyes burned, skin clammy from the constant damp. The others were asleep or pretending to be. The river called again. This time it wasn't a whisper. It was clear, loud enough that it vibrated the very air like the toll of a bell. "Come down," it said. "Come back. We know your name now." The sound rattled the lantern glass. My reflection in the metal curve of the lamp wasn't mine anymore. Its lips moved when mine didn't, mouthing the words the river had spoken. I smashed the lantern against the stone. Glass shattered, flame died. For a heartbeat, the chamber plunged into darkness, pure, absolute, and in that darkness, I swore I felt hands brush against me, wet and cold. Pulling at my sleeves, I lit a backup lantern with shaking hands, light spilling out in frantic halos. The water was calm again, silent, as if mocking me. But I knew better now. The rules had never been superstition. They were barriers. Thin, fragile barriers, and I had let one slip. The river had learned my name, and once it learns your name, you're no longer just a surveyor. You're a belonging. It started with whispers and ended with screaming. By the time the 11th night came, the camp was brittle with tension. None of us spoke openly anymore. Meals were silent, our spoons clinking against tin bowls like hammers striking nails. The air felt thick, humid with unseen breath. Lantern flames burned lower whenever I entered the chamber. I knew they were avoiding me now. The river hadn't stopped whispering my name. Every time I went near it, even when I didn't, it threaded my thoughts with voices, plucking memories I'd locked away. Lena's laughter, my father's disapproving silence, even my own voice mocking me from somewhere inside the current. The others had to hear it too, but if they did, they pretended otherwise. That evening, the first fight broke out. Two of the younger surveyors, Jans and Morik, were setting lanterns when one guttered near me. Jans hissed, jerking the flame away. "It dies when he comes near," he said, loud enough for the rest to hear. His eyes glistened with fury and fear. Morik snapped back, "Don't blame him. You know what this place does. It isn't him, it's the water." "It's because of him," Jans spat. He stayed past the toll. He should have drowned. He brought it back with him. I stood frozen, my hands tightening on the straps of my pack. Part of me wanted to deny it, to shout, but the words stuck. Because deep down I feared Jans was right. The others began murmuring, shifting uneasily. Havel, the senior surveyor, slammed his lantern pole into the ground. "Enough," he growled. "Blame doesn't keep you alive. The rules do. You forget them, you're gone. That's the end." But the damage was done. Whispers spread through camp like rot. I caught fragments as I passed by, marked, "Already drowned. Not one of us anymore." That night the river answered. We were gathered in the main cavern, lanterns clustered against the dark. Jans was still muttering under his breath when the first echo came. A deep, booming sound, not like the warning bell, but heavier, wet, like stone collapsing beneath water. The ground vibrated. Ripples spread across the pools, trembling into perfect circles. Every lantern flame wavered at once. Then came the second echo, louder, a roar that seemed to come from beneath our feet. Panic broke. "Move. Out of here," someone shouted. Boots splashed. Bodies slammed into each other as half the team bolted for the upper tunnels. The rest clustered closer to the light, clutching lanterns like lifelines. The third echo shattered the cavern. It was not sound. It was command. The water surged upward in sheets, walls of current crashing against stone. Lanterns toppled. Flames hissed out. I was thrown to the ground, choking as icy water filled my mouth, and then the river reached. Hands wet, translucent, dozens of them, rose from the current, grasping ankles, dragging bodies down. Jans screamed as he was yanked beneath, bubbles clawing up around him. Another surveyor vanished mid-shout, the water swallowing his voice whole. I scrambled onto a rock ledge, clutching at slick stone, as the current writhed below. Figures rose in the flood, faces I knew, faces I didn't, their eyes pale and mouths open in silent chants. Lena among them, hair floating like kelp, her hand reaching out to me. "Come down," she mouthed. Havel fought near the center, swinging his lantern wildly. For a moment it held the water back, shadows slashing across the cavern walls. But the flame sputtered, drowned by spray, and then he was gone too, swept away without even a cry. The flood receded as suddenly as it had risen. In its wake, half the team was gone. The survivors huddled, shivering, soaked to the bone, too afraid to speak. The cavern smelled of iron and moss, as though the water itself had bled. No one tended the missing bedrolls. No one asked where the others had gone. We all knew. The rules weren't rules anymore. They were warnings written too late. And now the expedition was no longer an expedition. It was a slow unraveling, thread by thread. I sat apart, lantern at my feet, listening to the river hum. It whispered my name again, softer this time, almost tender. The others avoided my gaze. But I saw it in their eyes, the thought they couldn't speak aloud. That maybe I was next. That maybe I already belonged to the water. The cavern had gone quiet after the collapse. No more arguments. No more frantic scrambling of boots against wet stone. Just silence, heavy and unbroken, as if the river itself had swallowed the last of the noise. Those of us who remained, if we could even call ourselves us anymore, moved through camp like sleepwalkers. We kept our lanterns lit, but the flames burned low and weak, trembling as though they too were afraid. No one spoke my name, though I felt it brushing against me constantly. Breathed into my ear by the river, by the stone, by the shadows that rippled at the edges of my sight, I stopped asking if anyone remembered Lena, or the cocky surveyor, or the ones who had vanished screaming into the flood. When I searched their faces, I saw only hollowness, eyes gone glassy, reflections already claimed. In the end, there was no formal decision, no ceremony. I simply rose one morning, if morning still meant anything down here, and took up my lantern. My boots scraped softly against the limestone. I slung my ruined notebook across my chest, though the pages were swollen and smeared with ink. And I began walking toward the tunnels. No one tried to stop me. Perhaps they believed I was leading the river away from them. Perhaps they were relieved to see me go. Or perhaps they had already given themselves to the current in their hearts and knew I was simply the next to follow. The tunnels seemed narrower now. The air pressed against me like damp cloth, thick and metallic on my tongue. My lantern flame wavered as though suffocating. Every drop of condensation, every faint shift of the current, was magnified into a roar, and everywhere, in every pool, every slick wall of black water, there were faces, not fully formed, never solid, just fragments scattered in ripples, a jawline rising in the current before dissolving, eyes opening beneath the surface, watching, lips moving in silence, speaking words I almost recognized. Sometimes I thought they spoke rules. Sometimes I thought they spoke my own thoughts back to me, twisted. I didn't count. I didn't even let my eyes linger long enough to try. Still, the pressure of the rules gnawed at me with every step. Each line engraved deeper than the last. Never count the shadows in the water. Never drink directly from the river. Always return by the third toll of the warning bell. Never let the lantern flame touch black water. I had lived by them. I had watched others break them. I had seen the consequences. And yet, walking alone in those endless tunnels, I finally understood. The rules had never been for survival. They were only delay, rituals to buy us time, because in the end, the river consumed everything. It was not a place, not a thing to be measured and mapped. It was a hunger that remembered, a current that learned, and it had learned me. When I knelt by the water's edge to mark one last line in my ruined notebook, I saw my reflection, not the way reflections should be. The flame above me guttered. My hand shook, yet the reflection remained steady. Its lips moved when mine did not. It mouthed my name over and over, water bubbling at the corners of its mouth. And when it smiled, I felt the tug of something deep inside me, the subtle shifting of blood turning sluggish, as if the river had already begun to circulate where my heart should be. I backed away, clutching the lantern like a weapon. Shadows rippled in the water, multiplying, stretching long and unnatural across the stone. I didn't count them, but I knew they were more than they had been yesterday, more than the day before. Each shadow was a tally mark, a debt the river intended to collect. The deeper I went, the more the river rose to meet me. Water lapped over stone that had been dry before. The tunnels breathed, expanding and contracting like a living thing. My boots filled with cold, my skin burned with dampness. By the time I reached the narrowest channel, the current spoke to me in full sentences. Sometimes it was Lena's voice, sometimes the cocky surveyor, sometimes my own mother, though she had nothing to do with this place. The river learned voices the way it learned names. It wanted me to answer, to respond, to acknowledge, but I kept walking. When I reached the final chamber, the place where the water widened into a vast black pool, I set down the lantern. The flame trembled low, its glow barely reaching the first ripples. Beyond that, nothing but endless darkness, a mirror to the void above the earth. I stared, and I realized something. Every rule we had followed, every precaution, had not been meant to protect us from death. They were meant to keep us from understanding too soon, to stop us from seeing the truth until it was too late to resist, because the river was not here to kill us. It was here to make us part of itself. My knees gave out. I sank to the wet stone, lantern light flickering across my pale hands. They looked thinner than I remembered. The veins beneath my skin pulsed dark, sluggish, heavy with water. My blood was already changing, my bones hollowing, my breath shallow as though shared with something vast and unseen. When I leaned forward just close enough for the lantern's glow to skim the surface, the water showed me faces, all of them. The surveyors who had come before, the ones who vanished without a sound. Lena, her eyes endless black. The cocky one still mouthing numbers, though no sound came. And deeper still, faces I didn't recognize. Generations swallowed before me, each etched into the current, layered one over the other until the whole pool seemed made of shifting liquid memory. They didn't scream. They didn't thrash. They only stared, lips moving in slow rhythm, repeating something over and over. It took me too long to understand what they were saying. They were counting. Not aloud, not in voices, but in the ripple of shadows, in the multiplication of forms across the water, an endless tally marked in liquid darkness, and I knew then I would join them. The lantern sputtered, smoke curling, and for a heartbeat the chamber went dark. I felt claws scrape stone near my feet, slick and reaching. My own reflection rose toward me, mouth open, ready to breathe me in. When the flame flared weakly back, I was still on the ledge. Still holding the handle. Still trembling, but I knew it wouldn't last. Nothing ever did down here. I pressed my ruined notebook flat against the stone, water soaking through the final page. With shaking hands, I wrote the last line I would ever write. The river always remembers. Then I set the lantern at the water's edge, and I waited. The shadows multiplied. The faces leaned close. And in the silence, I began to count, not aloud, not breaking the rule, but in my head, where the river could hear me anyway. 1, 2, 3. The current shivered with delight, and I understood at last that I was already theirs.